Hello, everyone, and welcome back for an episode of the Braincuriosity podcast. I am here with Alex Hogg. That's your full name, right? Or it's not just your TikTok handle.
Well, it's Alex Hogue.
Alex
but yeah.
Hogg. All right, I'm just butchering the
Yep.
name. It's fine.
No, you're okay. You're okay. South of the Mason-Dixon in the United States, it would be pronounced Hogg. In the South, my family's actually very famous for mental health. But north of the Mason-Dixon line, that's the North and South here.
All right.
It's a long O as opposed to a short O. It's all good. Everybody does it.
Amazing. So, Alex, you are a therapist, a psychiatrist, or...
I'm a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't prescribe medicine.
Okay.
I'm actually a licensed clinical social worker. So I have a master's level. I'm a master's level clinician, and I'm in an independent private practice. It's a group private practice in Moline, Illinois.
That's amazing, in Illinois. And you've been doing a lot of content on TikTok about ADHD and autism specifically, and about therapy for autism and ADHD, which is a super important topic. So I'm going to start right off the bat with the first question that I have for you today, which is why it's important for people with ADHD and autism to get therapy. What can it bring to them, and how it can be beneficial for people with ADHD and autism?
I think one of the most important factors when we're looking at neurodivergence, well, actually, the two biggest things that I work on with my clients and why it's important to actually have like a clinician that has a really in-depth understanding of neurodivergence. The first thing is psychoeducation. Understanding all the different aspects and the things that are going on with you. Because, back in the 80s and the 70s and even the early 90s, you'd get an ADHD diagnosis and they'd hand you some pills and say, all right, good luck, try not to die. And that was all you got. But there's so much more going on. In the last 5 years, the research on both ADHD and autism have just skyrocketed. Yep. And I actually blame, in the last 3 or 4 years, I actually attribute a lot of that to the pandemic and the shutdown, and when people lost their minds because all of a sudden their routines were destroyed. So the psychoeducation piece is huge. But the other part that I really feel is super important is translation. Neurodivergent folk, our brains are so vastly different from the neurotypical that we see everything through a neurodivergent lens, whether it's ADHD or autism or ADHD, because about anywhere from 50 to 70% of people that are diagnosed with one most likely have both. That's more recent research.
Yeah, and the variance is great in studies. It's I've seen 30%, 70%. It's anywhere in that huge kind of variance overlap.
Right. But translation, the psychoeducation part is massive. Just understanding that, oh yeah, this is a thing that happens with you. This isn't because you don't try hard enough. This isn't because, you're just a hot mess express. No, your brain has difficulty with emotional regulation and with executive function. That's just part of the brain. So we need to recognize that, embrace it, give yourself grace, and find the workarounds that are going to work best for you as an individual. Because if you've met one person with ADHD or autism, you've met one person with ADHD or autism. We are not just a set of diagnoses. We are a series of life experiences. But then when we look at translation, it's a lot of helping the person to navigate in a world that is more established for the neurotypical mind, as well as, from everything from jobs to relationships to just innocent conversation, friendships. The neurotypical brain is highly illogical.
Yes.
It is a brain. It is a brain that is based off of wanting to be seen the best in all aspects. And especially when you're looking at things like autism, honesty and directness is everything.
Yeah.
It is I always describe the autistic brain as like an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Everything is neatly ordered. Everything, it might not feel that way because of the emotional dysregulation, but everything has an if-then.
Yes, it's very consequential.
It's very exactly.
And coherent.
Exactly. It's a very sequential mind, and also it's very direct. And it's also very first person. Um, it's difficult a lot of the times for somebody on the spectrum to be able to
Visualize.
take someone else's experience if they've not had a similar or like experience that they can make a comparison of. So a lot of what I do is I explain, like, yeah, this is just a thing that happens. Like, you're right, it doesn't make sense. And I know that causes cognitive
Oh
dissonance
my
with you,
god,
that
yes.
it doesn't make sense. But here's the thing is most of humanity doesn't make sense. But in that neurodivergent brain, the idea that something doesn't make sense, that we can't find the way to click the Legos together inside of our mind, uh,
It's very distressing.
is well, and it causes a huge amount of dysregulation. It causes a huge amount of just overwhelm and feeling like they're doing something wrong. No, actually, I am married to a woman with autism.
Yeah.
She is the most phenomenal human. One of the case point examples that I always use with my wife is, um, and I think one of the best ways to describe like one of the key differences between a neurotypical brain and a neurodivergent brain. My wife has never once faked an orgasm,
Yeah.
and people are like, "What? That's really personal. That's really weird." I'm like, no, you don't understand.
No,
She would never do that because it never occurred to her that
because it doesn't make sense.
my that my ego is dependent on my performance. That I would feel less than if I didn't have that if I didn't leave her like weak and quivering and a broken mess on the floor after intimacy, that I was less than a man. But for her it was like, well, no, I didn't have one, so we need to figure out like how we can make that better next time, because I like those and you like those and you like those when I have those. So why on earth would I ever lie about that? I'm like, we talked about it. I'm like, well, in a normal relationship, it would be to make me feel better, to spare my feelings, to make me feel like I did good.
Yeah, but
That doesn't occur to her.
also long term that doesn't work because it's not logical. It hinders communication.
Exactly. It hinders communication. It hinders direct communication as opposed to this like tertiary, subtle,
The
hinting
assumption.
around the edges.
Yeah, and also the
Yes,
assumption of what
exactly.
the other person wants without them actually
Mhm.
telling that they need or want something.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We have a lot
Yeah,
of
so that's
this
I
with
mean
interactions with neurotypicals thinking that they know better than us what we need or what we want,
right,
when it's actually
right,
not the case. Like, I'm doing this for you, but I'm not needing this right now.
right. Stop buying me those things, I don't want them. So we had to figure out, like, the workaround. Again, if you met one person with autism or you've met one person with ADHD, you met one person, the there has to be an individualist approach to every single client.
Yeah,
And that's something that therapists need to understand, that you can't just like if your jam is CBT or ACT or DBT, you can't force your client into that slot, even though that has worked for so many people and works for so many people, because they're all wonderful approaches. But if you don't customize your approach, then you're doing your client a great disservice. I know one of your questions on your list was CBT. A lot of neurodivergents feel like CBT is self
Yeah,
gaslighting.
I've had this comment again and again when I've talked with CBT as, a valid approach because it works statistically on a certain amount of
Hmm.
people with ADHD and autism. And it's worked for me, for example, especially when it comes to routines or, to adapting
Hmm.
tools for everyday life. But for things like
Right.
emotions, when we've started working with emotions, every time the therapist would tell me, is that emotion coming from something real or for something not real? And usually, it's my experience, but a lot of people that I know with ADHD and autism, they rationalize a lot their feelings and they know already where they come from. And so CBT in those
Hmm.
cases doesn't work because we already have a very rational reason as to why we're feeling a certain way.
Hmm.
And so
Absolutely.
so I get the gaslighting part.
Right. Well, and I think that I think one of the biggest factors to understand when we're working with a neurodivergent mind, especially, is that this is an eclectic neurotype. This brain requires stimulus from a lot of different aspects. So just going straight CBT or just going straight DBT or just going straight ACT or just going straight Gestalt or straight mindfulness isn't going to be effective. We have to cherry pick
Aspects of
segments
different things and adapt them.
for each client.
And how do you adapt this when you meet the client for the first time? How do you figure out what cocktail to make and what ingredients to put in there?
It's a very organic process. It sometimes takes a long time. I'm not gonna
Yeah,
lie.
that's fair.
Yeah, I'm really good at what I do, and most of my clients would agree that I am some kind of magical brain wizard. Um, One of my clients secretly calls me the neuromancer behind my back. She thinks I don't know, but I know. Uh, I love that title. I'm getting out of my license plate. I think that's the best compliment I've ever received.
the
Brain wizard. I love it.
the ADHD
But
whisperer.
mhm, yes, very much. Well, that's why I got the Tism whisper on my hashtags. Uh,
I love it.
but it's very much an organic approach, and also realizing that as the client evolves, so must the therapist.
Yes.
Uh, because as we go, like initially, just teaching some like really basic somatic grounding techniques is going to make that client feel like they have unlocked the keys to the universe. Suddenly being able to calm their body so that they can understand their mind, that in that moment gives them such power. I mean, think about when we're infants. I always say that the best moment in a baby's life is the day that they learn to burp and fart on their own.
Yes.
They're no longer dependent on someone else to get them to be able to belch. They're no longer dependent on someone else to allow them to pass gas. And suddenly they're able in that moment to control a major source of unknown discomfort. So working with a client as an adult or a teen, I mean, I start with like about age 12, and my oldest client that I ever had was 111. He was actually the oldest living man in the United States at that time. He was cool.
Kudos.
But I know it was awesome. Well, mostly I was just helping him to die in peace. That was
Fair.
literally what we were working on, was letting go of the last things that he needed to let go of. It was weird and cathartic, but also beautiful. But that's the thing, is it has to be an organic and it has to be an evolutionary thing. A good therapist has to be trained in having a really good understanding of ADHD, a really good understanding of autism, but also understanding that they don't know anything about that client. Also, a good therapist can't just be trained in one or two particular techniques. We have to be able to address long-term trauma when we're looking, whether it's like big T trauma or little T trauma. The micro traumas that we experience compound. It's like it might only feel like a handful of sand,
Hmm.
but
But
if you
even just that can hinder a lot of things.
right, well, what I was saying is a handful of sand over time. If you have one handful of sand every day thrown into a bag
The
over
bag gets
15
heavy.
years, 20 years, that handful of sand, those handfuls of sand become pounds of sand, and we don't realize that we're carrying it around because it's progressive.
Yeah. And how do you make people realize that they're carrying this around, and how do you somehow lighten the sand?
Oh, wow. Lots of different ways. Um, well, first of all, helping people recognize that, like, yeah, you've been working very hard at trying to just simply exist in this world, really validating their experience, and then helping them to look at, like, okay, well, what are the different ways that you've struggled? Have you been struggling in relationships? Have you been struggling in cognition? Like, looking at the different ways, and then looking at like what those struggles without guidance have created in their minds, the negative self cognitions that occur in our mind. I have so many clients that are brilliant. They are some of the smartest humans, and they think that they suck at everything. They think they're terrible at everything. They think that they are worthless. They think that they are stupid. They think that they are incompetent because they're not good at like one thing.
Yep. I've seen, I think it was one of your videos when you said that we judge us by our best
Best,
days, but
yes,
not by our bad days, or even
yes.
not
The
by the
werewolf of
average.
yep, the werewolf of productivity. Those days when we are just super elevated. And that's the thing is like some days our brains are firing on all 8 cylinders and we are just jamming and rocking out. And we get done in one day what it takes most people weeks to
Weeks.
accomplish.
Yep.
Yeah. And I relish those days. I cherish those days. And that's actually one of the key components in my relationship with my wife is I'll have days where I'm just like, my brain says no.
Yep.
And but then she also knows, she's like, okay, so let's get done what we have to get done. And then we can focus on what we want to get done or what can get done later. Well, like we look at like a sense of urgency, like the dishes have to be done, or the trash has to go out, or I have to do my filing. Uh, so I use up the energy that I'm able to use accomplishing those things. And then other days, man, I'll tear up my entire garden. I'll get like 19 projects done. Granted, by the end of the day, I'm basically a limp noodle, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, yeah,
fantastic.
absolutely. It's great. It's just I think a lot of people find it frustrating that
Mhm.
we cannot control when we get into those states.
Right. And that's one of the big things that I really work with people on is like, listen, you need to be calm because the more you push back against yourself and the more you get angry at yourself, the less often you're going to have those beautiful days because you being angry at yourself and you beating yourself up every day for not being just like a grand champion every single day, that anger and that shame and that aggression towards yourself, that's using up resources.
Yep. A
And when I
lot.
tell them that, that makes their heads just go, oh God. I'm like, yeah, you're spending all of this energy doing something that is totally non-productive, but it's also what you've been told your entire life. So there's a lot of deprogramming involved too,
Yeah, it's something
which
that
is
I say a lot as well because when I found out I had ADHD and I finally managed to accept, as you
mhm,
said, the things that you can't do, and I stopped beating myself up every day for not being able to do the
mhm,
dishes or to clean the whole apartment and stuff like that. I
right.
just regained a massive amount of energy.
Mhm,
And when I stopped beating myself up for not doing these things, I actually managed to do them more.
mhm. Absolutely. Because when can remove, and one of the big things that I really work on a lot with my clients is removing the emotional component from task assignation.
That's difficult.
It is so. I am 48 years old, and I am almost there. Almost.
It's a lifetime of.
Right. Like we look at the dishes and we look at the dishes like a punishment. No, it's simply a thing that needs to be done. The dishes are neither good nor bad. They are morally neutral. Understanding that productivity is morally neutral, especially when with ADHD, we're not getting always the big ding of dopamine that neurotypicals get. Like when I clean the kitchen, that just means the kitchen is clean.
Yep.
I don't get the sense of satisfaction and joy of having the
Yeah.
kitchen cleaned, which
Yeah, I've never had
and
that either.
right, exactly. And that's a major component that is needed to be understood, especially when you have a partnership between a neurotypical and a neurodivergent. Because the neurotypical is like, doesn't it feel good to have the kitchen clean? No. What does feel good? Video games, sex, working on a project that I'm really excited about,
Yep.
hyperfixating for 7 hours on the lifespan of the South American vole, uh, and your partner's
Yeah.
just looking at you like, the fuck?
Yeah, and it's also things that do not necessarily excite neurotypicals, so they don't get it.
Right. Well, and also neurotypicals will see those things as very selfish actions. Oh, you just want to do fun things all day. You just want to be the grasshopper and not the ant. And no, it's not that. I just don't take pleasure in certain things. Like I do take a great deal of joy when my garden looks good. I do take a great deal of joy when my lawn looks good because gardening and permaculture and things like that are a major passion of mine. It's a huge interest of mine. So when I do something and it works, I have so much elation. I can walk out and I can look at my vegetable patch every day of the summer and take so much dopamine and get so much joy off of like, oh look, there's a potato flower. And I'm giddy and I'm elated. That's one of the reasons I start my day every day with going out and I do a walk around my yard. I see like what's growing, what's coming down, what do I need to take down, how are my chickens doing? Because we use dopamine stacking a lot. 'Cause I don't like getting up. I am not a morning person, but having chickens has turned and having a dog has turned
Oh
me
yeah.
into a morning person because he's my buddy's right here with me.
Oh,
He's a good boy.
I
I
love
love him.
dogs.
Yeah, I've got a Yog Terrier, so he's just like full of energy and love. That's his existence.
Yeah, and in the
Uh,
morning he needs to get out and to play and to do
exactly
stuff. And
right. I won't do anything for me, but I will do everything for someone else.
so this is something that I've experienced a lot as well with my partner, and something that we do is that, for example, when we have to take doctor's appointments or stuff like that, we do it for
Hmm.
each other,
Yep.
because I will not do it for myself,
Nope.
but I'll do it for my partner,
Yep. In a
and
heartbeat.
vice versa.
Uh huh.
And it will be a lot easier. I won't feel the dread. I won't feel the executive dysfunction. I won't feel the
Hmm.
anxiety about calls and all of that,
Right.
because it's for someone else, so it's fine.
Right. Exactly. It's almost like creating in a partnership. It's almost like creating a token economy.
More or less.
Well, but and some people will see that as, well, why can't you just do stuff for me? Why does it need to be a trade? I'm like, well, because I want to do something for you, but I can't do it for me. So if you'll call my doctor and make my appointment for me and then remind me the morning of my appointment, I'll make sure that I cook dinners for, the whole month.
Yeah,
Because that's something that I love to do. I love to cook. I love to feed people because it's, again, another way of me showing that I love and care. And my wife can book all the appointments. She's very good at keeping a schedule in her head. Again, that beautiful autistic Excel spreadsheet in her mind. Like, we've really learned how to utilize our own neurodivergencies and really just like embrace and love and accept each other's neurodivergence and
that's
utilize
beautiful.
each other's strengths instead of getting pissed off because, oh, well, you can't do this, well, you can't do this, well, you no, that's ineffective.
Yeah, very
So
much so. Instead, it's
that
better to
yeah,
focus on what you can do.
yeah, it's like tying your own legs together and and expecting that that's going to make you jump better. I don't know, it's dumb. So really learning, and the thing is, like, a lot of times there's a lot of infantilization. Like, if a neurotypical partner has a neurodivergent partner, they feel like it's infantilizing. Like, oh, well, why can't you make your own doctor's appointments? Well, because going to the doctor isn't important to me.
Yeah, or it's important, but it's just so many steps, and
Hmm.
that feels
Exactly.
difficult.
And that's another thing that I talk about a lot with clients is understanding that simple tasks are not one task. It's a series of micro tasks,
Yeah.
like doing the dishes. First, you have to gather any dishes that might be in the house. So you have to inspect every room, and that's its own little like fantastic distraction space because you're trying to avoid doing the undesirable task. So you'll do less undesirable tasks like, oh yeah, I was going to do the dishes, but instead I vacuumed, I cleaned the living room, I mowed the lawn, I threw in a load of laundry. I didn't fold them, but I threw in a load of laundry and it's probably still in the washer, but I threw in a load of laundry. And then I went to the grocery store because I thought, hey, wouldn't you like to have pasta puttanesca for dinner? So I went and got all the things to make your favorite dinner, and I made your favorite dinner. Yes, the kitchen's still a wreck, but I did do 19 other things. Oh, and I did forget to get the cups out of the dining room.
Yep,
Damn
absolutely.
it. Right.
Absolutely. We do
So
that.
the yeah, so the one thing they ask you, instead of hyperfixating on the one thing they asked you to do, they don't notice like all the other cool crap you did. Like, yeah, that's great, but you didn't do the one thing I asked you to do. And it
Yeah, but you
becomes
did a
so
thousand other
frustrating.
things. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And it becomes
Right.
pressure, and it becomes the cycle of guilt and shame and all of that, and
Hmm.
less energy and all that
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
I've had a lot of questions here, but I think you answered most of them in everything that you said. Um,
That's what I
so
do.
the first thing is how okay, this one may be interesting. How is therapy for people with ADHD and autism different from therapy for neurotypicals?
Um, well, it's a lot more client centered and recognizing that the individual is their own living ecosystem. Uh, as opposed to like when I work with a neurotypical client, I'll say, okay, well, let's see, what are your stressors? What's your life history? What's your trauma history? Things like that. And I'll do the same thing with a neurodivergent client, but I also realize that like neurotypicals tend to be affected more by what's going on outside of them,
Mhm.
and neurodivergents tend to be affected a lot more by what's going on inside of them, as well as the translation issues of what's going on outside of them.
So there's more
So,
coherence between the external and the internal struggles.
yes. So, also looking at, oh man, brain's going all over the place. When we look at the things that are affecting externally, we have to look at, okay, what are accommodations that we can create for the individual? What kind of sensory issues are you having? Because, like, when we're looking at a neurodivergent brain, one of the first things we're going to look at is how does your environment affect you physically, cognitively, and emotionally?
Yes.
Not just like how do relationships affect you, but the environment itself. Do you work in an area with fluorescent lights? Do you work in an area that is very loud? Do you go to school in a space where it is very crowded and upsetting? Do you have difficulty filtering out secondary and tertiary noises? Um, what is it that is actually stopping you from achieving your goals? And what are your goals? Because that's another thing is the goal systems are very different oftentimes
Hmm.
from a neurotypical to a neurodivergent client. A neurotypical client might say, "I just want to feel less depressed." Okay, we can work on that.
Fair.
And a neurodivergent client is like, "Well, everything's on fire, Alex, and everything hurts, and
Yeah.
I don't know why, and I just feel dumb and stupid." Okay, let's break that down. Who told you that you were dumb and stupid first? Looking at the messages that we've pulled in from people that we believed were authorities, people that we believed were our archetypes. And because I mean, somebody could have told you like one time when you were 13 that you had a terrible singing voice
And you're going to remember that for the rest of your life.
and you will stop singing.
Yep.
Or some of that good old ODD or PDA will kick in and you'll be like, well, screw you. I'm going to sing all the time now. Yeah, it goes one way or the other. It's either complete shutdown or absolute defiance, which can be a useful tool. I was actually told in grad school by one of my professors that I would be a terrible therapist because I had horrible listening skills.
Huh. Well, that didn't turn out quite as they predicted.
Yeah. No, she was very wrong. Um, yeah, that's very true. But I also took that. Like, I almost dropped out of grad school that year.
Yeah.
I almost dropped out. I'm like, fine, I shouldn't do this. I had a lot of issues with my cohort because they had this very cookie cutter idea of what therapy was. And I'm like, no, we can't just know one thing. We have to know hundreds of things in order to be able to serve our clients best. And I was all over the place. Like, I wanted to learn every technique there was because I knew that at some point, some part of one of those techniques would be useful to a client. Even if I will learn an entire skill set just to serve one client.
Yeah, and also it's always stuff that you can reuse afterwards because knowledge is never going to be lost.
Right, exactly. We're never, yeah. There's no market in which the coin of knowledge is not going to be spent at some point.
Yeah, and about this is also something that I try to tell a lot to people is that when we have ADHD, we kind of are interested in 1,000 of different things. And a lot of people tell us that it's bad because you should be interested only in one thing and do it well. But I disagree because I've been interested in a ton of different stuff throughout my life.
Hmm.
And I've always found a way to recycle that knowledge somehow at some point.
Oh heck yeah!
And knowledge is always going to be useful and it's never going to be wasted to learn something.
Well, and especially if you work in a field where part of your job is establishing rapport with a client,
Yeah.
you never know what weird tidbit is going to be incredibly useful. One of my clients was very anxious about engaging in therapy. And I asked him, like, okay, well, what do you do for fun? Like, what are your hobbies? What are your interests? What are your passions? And they said, I really like building terrariums. I love isopods. I love all these bugs. I'm like, oh, I built a couple terrariums. And then we started talking about like how we ourselves are like a self-enclosed ecosystem. And
Yes.
when that ecosystem goes out of balance, it can go aerobic, it can go anaerobic. If we don't have like the right amount of bugs, if we don't have the right amount of plants, if we don't have the right amount of water, if we don't have the right amount of lights, the whole system, if one part fails in the system, the whole system collapses. And that was actually how they decided that therapy was good for them. So
That's
we never,
amazing.
yeah, like we never know. We never know. Like I have used one of my bachelor's degrees um, is in English literature, and I have utilized the Canterbury Tales at least 3 times
That's amazing.
in order to inspire kids to read, or like okay, not all reading is boring. Like the Canterbury Tales, it's dirty. Like what? I'm like, oh yeah, oh yeah. Chaucer was all about like the softcore porn. What?
Yeah.
And now they get excited because they're like, ooh, I'm going to read something naughty. It's just like when you learn a foreign language, the first thing we want to learn in a foreign language as a kid is swear
It's the
words.
swear words, yeah.
Exactly. And yet my French teacher would never ever teach it. We had to find out online. Well, we back then we didn't have the internet because I'm freaking old. Um,
Oh, you can find a way.
yeah, there's always a way. Yeah,
I have another question for you.
yeah,
That you have clients with ADHD, clients with autism,
uh-huh.
and
Yeah, yeah.
there's a fair amount of overlap that has been shown in research.
Mhm.
Although there can also be a fair amount of selection bias in those studies because they're done usually in people that are already diagnosed. But
Right. Yeah, a
the main
lot of
question that I have
co-occurring
for you is,
traits.
how is it different? What are the main differences that you find in clients that have ADHD and those that have autism and those that have both?
Okay. Wow.
It's yeah.
Wow, Ludo. Okay, you just coming at me. Okay, so if it's pure ADHD, if it's straight up ADHD, we're looking at a lot more difficulty with advanced planning. We're looking at a lot higher levels of impulsivity. We're looking at a lot higher levels of like risk taking behavior, as well as higher levels of self medicating behavior, and then over medicating and addictions, because the ADHD brain is like, well, if some is good, then lots is even better. Um,
Yeah. Immediate reward.
also, also a lot. There tends to be a lot more really intense, explosive behavior. Cycling from one severe emotion or one very intense emotion, not severe, one very intense emotion to another very intense emotion. Uh, ADHD is definitely more of an issue of emotional dysregulation and executive function. And when an emotion is a lot of what affects the executive function, like I said, ascribing that moral value to performative tasks. And ADHD people also tend to be, in general, and I don't like to generalize. I shouldn't do that because everyone with ADHD is a little bit different. Pure ADHD, they tend to be more very outgoing, very the life of the party, the clown, or the helper, very
Ah,
hyper engaged. They need a role in every situation in order to feel like they belong in the situation. Which is why a lot of us end up in like caregiver type roles,
oh yeah.
um, medical
I was that one
roles,
very much.
yeah, um, and the autistic brain. But the other thing about the ADHD is we also feel very alone in those
Yep.
situations. Like we feel like if we're not performing, then we have no value,
Yep.
which
Yeah,
is
I can
which is
very much
also
see
where
that.
like the imposter syndrome and the rejection sensitivity kick in. And with autism, it is very much a singular soul experience. And this isn't to say that people with autism lack empathy, but it's but it sometimes it has to be more of a relational empathy. Like
So, what would be a relational empathy? Just
like say if you came in and if you were my therapist and I came in and I said, Ludo, my mother died.
Okay.
And you would say,
I'm sorry
loss is
about
hard.
that.
My loss is hard. My cat died 3 years
Yeah.
ago.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I see what you mean. I'm going to try to relate that experience to something that happened to me.
right. It's very much a relational experience, which can often feel, to the other individual very like devaluing. Like, how can you compare my mother to a cat? Um, but
Yes. Okay. I
to
see. And
an
so
aut-
that can come out as lacking empathy, but it's actually a trying to have that kind of connection because this is how I
well,
relate.
it's not even trying to have that connection. It is that connection because for that individual that lost that cat, death is death is death. I lost this cat. This cat was my best friend. This cat was my confidant. This cat was my comfort. This cat was my place. This cat was the one thing that made me feel completely accepted. So, in that way,
It's
I
exactly like your
understand
mother. Yeah.
exactly. But that's the thing is if we can't elaborate, if we can't break it down, if we can't step out of our own shallow, self-centered, ego-centered mind, we can't create that we can't fathom that relation. There's also a lot of like autism. It does tend to be very more logic based. Things have to be things have to make sense, and also, um, I mean, there can be some impulsivity with autism, especially when it comes to interests. Uh, but the ADHD brain is far more likely to like go out and buy $600 worth of stuff and be interested in it
Hmm.
for 3 days.
Yeah.
While the yeah, like, damn it, Alex, calling me out. Whereas like a lot of what I see personally with the autistic brain is they will say, "This is really cool," and they will hyperfixate on all the aspects of it. They'll like do massive amounts of research before they go out and buy one thing for the thing, and oftentimes they'll talk themselves out of it because they'll decide that it's impractical or they don't have time or it's not cost effective. Which is, and then when you have somebody with a combined brain,
That
it's
becomes fun.
it's awful, actually. Yeah. It's very what's interesting is the two neurotypes balance each other in so many ways because like the ADHD lets the autistic person be outgoing and gregarious and silly and wild and fun and and like impulsive, while also the autistic part of the brain is going, yeah, yeah, but maybe we should explore more of Bernoulli's theories before we tie the sheet to our wrists and ankles and jump off the second story of a roof, because flight might be hard, buddy. Uh, so there
Yeah,
is a lot of
it's
balancing, and I see that
but
in my daughter
even
all the time.
neurologically,
Mm-hmm.
in the brain, I've seen articles that said that, for example, there was less connectivity between the two hemispheres of the brain in autism, but
Mm-hmm.
increased connectivity in ADHD. So that
Yeah.
is kind of a very weird interaction as well, because
Mm-hmm.
it's it might still not be the same kind of connectivity that you may find in neurotypicals. It might be
Mm-hmm.
even a third, completely different type that
Oh yeah.
interacts in its own way with all of the other
Mm-hmm.
brain functions. For the
Absolutely.
executive dysfunctions as well, the interaction might be awful because autistic people struggle with executive dysfunction, ADHD people struggle with executive dysfunction. So you couple both of them and you have just a
Mhm.
ninth circle of hell of executive function.
Oftentimes, yeah, task paralysis and heightened levels and heightened issues of dissociation occur as well.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when those two brain hemisphere when the ADHD and the autism go at it in a fist fight in the brain, the individual will literally just completely shut down and dissociate.
Yeah.
I
My
mean,
partner describes this a lot.
I've caught my kid just sitting on the edge of her bed for like an hour and a half when she's supposed to be getting ready for school
Yeah.
because she couldn't decide if she wanted to go like fun and flirty or comfy for school that day. And
Yeah.
her it was like she was having some sort of like UN summit in her head to let it decide.
Yeah. I have that as well.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
a lot of the time when I have to take a decision or there's a task that I need to do and it's unclear how I should be
Hmm.
doing, then I start just thinking in my head about all the ways in
Mm-hmm.
which I can do this task, and I end up just not doing it in the end because I've spent too much time just thinking.
Right. Well, and what's interesting is both neurotypes will approach a task from very similar but different aspects. Like the ADHD brain will go through every single way that they have done a thing and could do a thing, as well
Yeah.
as then researching like new ways to do the thing. And the autistic brain will look at every single way that this has been a success versus every single way this has been a failure, and almost like a sheet of paper with a line down the middle of
Yeah.
pros and cons of performative engagement. Also, when we're looking at that, we're looking at energetic resources as well as cognitive resources. And I think that the ADHD brain will tend to get a little bit more rammy. By rammy, I mean just kind of bowl their way through it, like hammer through it and get it done versus standing back and going, what is the best process to achieve this, to achieve the desired goal? My wife actually described it beautifully one night. We were laying in bed talking about the different ways our brains work, and she said, "Yeah, your brain is like Captain Kirk, and my brain is like Mr. Spock, like from Star Trek."
Yeah. From Star Trek, absolutely.
Yeah, because
Mr.
James
Spock is
Kirk
very
is like,
logical and
right, and Kirk's like, "Let's go down there and get him and have sex with everything, and then let's go down that planet." Sir, shouldn't we see if the air is breathable first? Ah, Spock, come on. Yeah.
I relate a lot. The ADHD for me, I'm seeing it in characters. I'm seeing it a lot in Luffy from One Piece.
Oh my gosh,
Uh,
yeah. Holy
that
cow. Luffy is
Yeah,
pure ADHD. Well, and also if we look at Calvin and Hobbes, like the old Bill Watterson cartoon,
yeah,
Calvin is pure unadulterated ADHD, and Hobbes is actually, if we look at it, Hobbes is Calvin's logos. That Hobbes is his ego and superego, and Calvin's like mostly id.
okay.
If we're gonna get like Freudian about it, I'm not psychodynamic in any way, but there is value in every approach.
Yeah,
There's value in everything. There's value in taking from different approaches and going, yeah, okay, so these are some foundational things. There had to have been some truth at the time about this. It's just that Freud was very obsessed with penises,
and
which
Coke.
is weird because his daughter was the one that actually did most of the work. So maybe it was Anna that had, some anger about men, which would be understandable in, Austria at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
But yeah, so when we're looking at that, we're looking at like these two beautiful neurotypes, and the thing is, what we don't realize is that the best expeditions on Star Trek were the ones where Kirk and Spock balance each other out.
yeah. And when they work together,
Mm-hmm. And then when Bones was involved, when Dr. McCoy was involved, he was like so we had id,
oh,
ego, and
I have lost
superego
you.
basically. And so Bones was ego. He'd be like, "Well, Jim, I don't know if that's a good idea." Whoop, I think you froze.
Yeah, we
Oh, there.
you were frozen as well for a bit there.
Yeah.
It's fine. It came back.
Okay.
I'm going to edit it out. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So
Just
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just moving on a bit because I'm seeing the. I mean, it's fine. We can go over time. I don't really mind. I can edit stuff out. But I wanted just to ask a question about this because the whole Luffy conversation and Spock and Kirk made me think about
Mm-hmm.
this. Is that when I was a kid, I was very much like Luffy.
Mm-hmm.
Like very much
So,
so, very, very outgoing, very impulsive, very generous with a lot of emotion, very
mm-hmm.
justice sensitive as well, because
Mm-hmm.
justice sensitivity is part of both ADHD and autism, but in different ways from what I understand. And then,
Yes.
life happened and I got a lot more introverted
Mm-hmm.
and a lot more in an inattentive presentation, a lot more laid back, so to speak.
Masked.
And yeah, masked. And a lot of people, so a lot of things that you said also for autism is something that I relate to now, but I didn't relate to when necessarily when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions that I had in there is how trauma or the small pounds of sand, how can
Mm-hmm.
they affect, modify, ADHD and autism, how can they modify these presentations, and how can they make everything harder and more confusing, basically?
We learn to shut off various parts of ourselves throughout our life.
Yep.
We learn that this part of ourself is unacceptable or too much for some people. And so we turn off parts of ourselves. It's literally like a breaker box in our head.
Hmm.
We switch off the various parts of ourselves, and then and then as adults, as we begin to understand that, like, oh, this is neurodivergence, it's so hard to put those switches back on out of various reasons, and a lot of it is fear. When we're
Yeah.
kids, we are pure. We are we don't understand how dreadful the world is, uh, and also kids are both the most self-aware, but also the most unaware. We are very aware of self. We are very aware of how we are feeling and what we want and what we're experiencing in that moment, but we're not always aware of how those experiences affect others around us. And as we age, like usually, and it starts usually around like about age 8 to 10. For some people, obviously, starts far earlier, but we start to realize that like our own sense of self is disquieting or unpleasant or really more to the point inconvenient for others. And so in order to but we want those relationships, we want that sense of belonging. We are a pack animal. Humans are a tribal creature. So
Yeah.
we do what we can to modify ourselves through self-shaming, through self-blaming, to reshape ourselves into a version of ourselves that can fit into different social situations, especially it's, and with ADHD, we will tend to create multiple personas, different variants of ourselves to fit into very specific social climates. Like my clinic me is very different than dad me, is very different than husband me, is very different from friend me. And my friend me is also going to change from this friend to this friend to this friend to this friend to this friend based on my interpretations of what is good for them and what is acceptable for them, because I don't want anyone else to feel uncomfortable. And when we look at the autistic uh, reshaping, it is shutting down many aspects of the self and creating more of a solo persona in a lot of ways for a lot of people. I mean, some people will still do the multiple phasics, but they'll shut down all the parts of them that make them autistic, all the parts of them that are beautiful, in order for them to fit into one specific mold, and they hold that mold so tightly because trying to do all these other things is too much energy. Whereas the ADHD brain has too much energy anyway. So we're like, cool, I'll make like 19 different versions of myself. My friends have said that before. They're like, I don't even know you. Because like we go
Yeah.
here and you're like Mr. Super Analytical and like very deep science and you're philosophical. And over here, you're like the drunken idiot that takes his pants off at the bar. And over here, you're this brilliant clinician that just like unpacks everything. And then over here, you're basically a foul mouthed sailor. Who are you? I don't even know you. And I say,
All of those at the same time, to be honest,
and I,
because it's all parts of you. It's
right,
just you put
right,
forward different parts of you at some point.
right,
It's something that I've done. I relate very deeply to everything that you have said, the
right,
chameleon part, the blending in the environment, basically.
right. I mean, it's almost like parts theory or family systems where we'll adopt individual specific aspects of ourselves to apply to different environments in order to be accepted, in order to be loved, in order to be welcomed and wanted and valued. And, but that also causes us to feel very alone
Yeah.
because we recognize, and I think that's where a lot of the neurodivergence of feeling like never belonging anywhere is, because we recognize that in different situations most situations, the whole self can never be accepted, only parts. Which I think is why it's so incredibly important to have your neurodivergent community where you can just be exactly who you are. Like years ago, I realized, like, wow, almost all of my friends that I have today, without exception, well, one person actually, uh, is either ADHD or autistic.
So you were saying about the masking, about the fact that ADHD people have a lot of energy. And so they
Mm,
get into this kind of chameleon thing where they fit in into every situation. And actually, studies, I mean, many studies have shown that people with ADHD have also chronic exhaustion. They feel tired all
mhm.
the time, which has been
Yeah,
very much my experience as well.
sure. Well, it's
Maybe because
because
you burn out at some
right.
point.
Oh yeah, well, it's because we're throwing all this energy into being one variant of ourselves and suppressing all the other areas of ourselves. Like it's like having 150 gallons of water and only allowing it to drip. But that
Yeah,
water,
so that
right?
could
But
take
that
a lot
water isn't
of
right,
energy.
right, exactly. But that water is in an insufficient container, so eventually it bursts, and that's when burnout happens.
And so,
So
what can you do when you're in that situation with ADHD? Because a lot of people with ADHD that I talk to, they do not feel that they have too much energy. They feel that they don't have any, that they're
right,
overwhelmed constantly. Right?
right. Well, and a lot of it is learning to. I think a lot of it is just learning to find community and also kind of learning to customize and streamline our life in the best ways possible so that more aspects of the genuine self can be expressed, but also learning to not throw 110% of everything into everything we do. Um,
Hmm.
even if that, even if what we're doing is restraining ourselves, if that makes
But
sense.
it does. But so, I mean, sometimes I feel that when I restrain myself, for example, I spend more energy than when I actually just do things at 110%.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the thing is it's also making sure that the situations are appropriate for everything that we do. Like I can throw myself 110% into a lot of what I do. Like I throw myself in 100% when I'm doing therapy. And at the end of the day, I am
Drained.
cognitively and mentally exhausted, but I am also thoroughly energized at the same time because I'm doing the thing that I'm wired to do. I'm doing the thing I'm built to do. Like for me, the best energizing thing in my life is solving puzzles. Any puzzle. Like whether it's a tavern puzzle or a jigsaw or a person because people are the best puzzles. And because people are the most fantastic puzzles because it's a puzzle that's always changing. It's developing, it's becoming more complex or it's becoming, more streamlined because sometimes we're working on like horribly critical things and sometimes we're just like, okay, how do I make it through my day without wanting to cry? Okay, well, let's look at like what are the things that are stressing you out? What are the things that are exhausting you? What are the things that are getting to you environmentally? What are the things that are getting to you internally? What are the negative cognitions that are passing through your mind throughout the whole day? Because like if you can go through the whole day going, yeah, I got this versus everything hurts and I suck. Like that's energetically draining. So recognizing internally what we're doing to ourselves as well as how the external environment is affecting us. Yeah, a lot of people I hit those exhaustive phases a lot. So I will do body scans of myself multiple times a day. I will check in with myself emotionally. How am I doing right now? And also then in those moments, and this is a big key is and I talk about this a lot in my videos is giving oneself grace and the concept of good enough. And the concept of good enough changes from day to day to day. Because generally, when we wake up in the morning, we kind of know, like, initially, you're like, okay, today's going to be pretty all right. Like, I can do
Yeah.
this much stuff. Whereas maybe some days I can do this much
Yeah.
stuff, and other days, oh man, okay. But you're still expected to be able to accomplish this much stuff with this much energy or this much cognitive energy. And I think that's where a lot of it lies. It's not even necessarily physical energy, it's cognitive and emotional energy. Like, what can we output during that day? And then giving ourselves that permission to stick to that level of output throughout a day.
Yeah, we with my partner we color code our days. We say that this one is a green day, so we're
Yep.
fine and we can do a lot of stuff. Or it's an orange day, which means I'll need to just do the things that are a top priority and nothing else. Or
Yep.
it's a red day, meaning don't talk to me and I can
Yep.
do nothing today.
Yep. Absolutely. My wife
Basically,
will actually ask, I will ask our, well, my wife and I'll ask those things too. Like, she'll say, like, okay, what do you think you can get done today? I'm like, well, I think I can get 3 or 4 major tasks done today, but with those, I need to make sure that at least 1 or 2 of those tasks are personally enjoyable.
okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, like I love going to the grocery store. My wife does not.
Yeah, uh, because sensory overstimulation and colors and sounds and all of that, right?
Yep, and also getting to think about like, ooh, because cooking for me is a major source of mindfulness. When I'm cooking, I'm paying attention to how I'm cutting the vegetables. I use, uh, was it Thich Nhat Hanh that talked about anything can be a meditation? Uh, Utilizing mindfulness throughout my day, paying attention to how I'm doing. And that's a big thing is we tend to get caught up in the experience without noticing what it's doing to us internally and externally.
Yeah.
So that is one of the big ways we tend to experience burnout is because we are not monitoring ourselves. We're not looking at our own gas tank or petrol in Spain. Yeah. But yeah, we're not noticing those things. We're not paying attention to like, oh crap, I've been out of gas for 4 hours.
Yeah, yeah, it's true because, and that's what you said also before we started recording the alexithymia. I think it was the hard having a
Mm-hmm.
hard time recognizing emotions and physical
Mm-hmm.
sensations, which is also why a lot of people with ADHD struggle with recognizing hunger or satiety or thirst or these kind of
Mm-hmm.
things. The
Yep.
recurring joke on TikTok about go drink water, you dehydrated goblins.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. Like, well, and even recognizing like why we're not drinking. I just did a video about my favorite cup.
yeah,
Having a thing that makes the sensory experience of hydration pleasurable can also increase your ability to hydrate. Like, it's not necessarily even sometimes what you're drinking, but what you're drinking out of. Like, I love this thing.
yeah, yeah. My
It's like a,
partner also
it's,
has a cup
yeah,
like that, and
yeah.
manages to drink a lot of water just in one
Hmm.
sitting because it's just automatic somehow. It's
Right.
pleasant.
Realizing that, like, most of our difficulties aren't just based off of one sensory issue, but multiple sensory issues. I realize that I hate the taste of water if it's out of plastic or anything or like even ceramic because it leaves residue.
But
I
glass is
will
fine.
I yeah, the glass doesn't have it's less porous, so it's not going to hold on to a lot of the residual things. I can taste things that were in a cup even though it's been washed that were in it before, and it bothers me because that doesn't taste like water. I also only drink really good filtered water. We have a super filtration system at our house, and that encourages me to drink more water, so I'm able to stay hydrated.
That's amazing. Yeah, I
Right.
feel this with coffee. I prefer coffee in a glass than in a cup.
Yeah. Yeah. I also only drink cold coffee. I drink iced coffee all day long. Um, I tend to drink, well, and this one's, if you want, tell me you have ADHD without telling me you have ADHD. 90% of the time, I will only drink cold beverages because with time blindness, I will forget when I poured it,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
will either
same.
burn the living shit out of my face, which makes me not want to drink
Yes,
anything because now I don't trust that beverage because that beverage was mean to me. or I just
Or it's
wind up with
freezing
like,
because you forgot it for 4 hours.
right, yeah, exactly. I wind up with like something tepid in room temperature, which is also revolting. So instead, I just take all of that out of the equation and I stick mostly with cold beverages, intentionally cold beverages, iced beverages, because then it's a consistent. I always know what temperature my beverage is going to be at, so it will never betray me.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate very heavily to that. All
Yeah.
right, I'm moving on to the next question,
Yeah.
which is a lot of people. So with with ADHD, they grow up with with ADHD and also with autism, they grow up with PTSD, they grow up with depression, they grow up with
Yeah.
anxiety. Even as kids, I mean, I've had a
Yes.
chat with a doctor about burnout, and she said that burnout people with ADHD and autism can start very early, as early as teenage years or stuff
Even
like that.
earlier, I would say even earlier than that. It's just that burnout presents more as like in younger kids, it'll present more as pathological demand avoidance. Like, I really do believe that PDA has a lot more to do with the lack of interoception, alexithymia, and the desire to please someone, but also the inability to express what we're experiencing. Like and I get yelled at a lot by like parents on this one. Like, no, PDA is terrible. I'm like, yeah, it is, but try having it.
Yeah,
Like, yes, it's
and
inconvenient for you and it's rough for you when you're dealing with a kid or a partner that's experiencing pathological demand avoidance. But if we look at the primary traits of it, if we look at like what describes PDA, out if we eliminate the refusal to do things, making direct eye contact, mimicking behavior, all these things that like those traits, what are those? Those are masking, and those are
yeah,
an attempt at communication. Every behavior is an attempt at communication.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and burnout is very real. Like it and it happens very young. When we see little kids doing it, they'll usually present with like anger, or they'll present with like
hmm
crying, whining, having temper tantrums, things like that,
yeah,
because they're so
chronic pain as well.
dysregulated. And then as we age, that changes a little bit too. Did we freeze again? Oh, we're good.
Yeah,
Okay.
slightly. Yeah, I was saying
Yeah.
chronic pain as well.
Yep. Chronic pain is another thing, partially because of the lack of interoception. We will injure ourselves all the time. Also, things like gut issues as well as
hmm
connective joint issues are
Yeah,
so very
hypermobility.
prevalent, as well as sleep disorders. Delayed sleep phase
Yes.
disorder is one of the most common things that you'll see with ADHD and autism. Also, issues with gut health. And if your stomach isn't doing what it needs to do, you're not going to be able to produce the core ingredients for the neurotransmitters to do well.
Yeah.
So depression and anxiety are going to go along with that. I mean, there's studies now that are saying like the gut is the second brain. If we don't have
Yes.
good stomach and gut health, then we're not going to have good mental health, because
Yeah.
serotonin is made in the gut, dopamine is made in the gut, acetylcholine is made in the gut, norepinephrine is produced in the gut, and without
Yeah.
norepinephrine, we are screwed. I mean, that's one of the
Yes.
reasons why stimulant
Absolutely.
drugs work, is because it's a norepinephrine antagonist, and norepinephrine is the bus driver.
Yeah, it's either a dopamine reuptake inhibitor or norepinephrine, and then it just rebalances the whole thing.
Right.
And but basically, the question behind that was when PTSD, anxiety, depression, all of that, it's and burnout is such a normal part of so many people that are ADHD and autistic. How
Yeah.
do you distinguish what is the autism and what is all the comorbidities that come with it?
You don't. You treat it all as a whole person. You treat
Yeah.
the trauma alongside everything else, because it's all one person. Realizing that trying to put somebody into six different boxes is very unkind. Now, that granted, sometimes in one session you might focus on like somatic tools for soothing physical sensory issues. So that's one tool in your toolbox. You might treat specific traumatic instances in the life with EMDR or somatic experiencing or brain spotting or ITP or any of the other trauma things out there. You can even use shadow work and journaling to help somebody get to the root cognition, the root understanding of why. I mean, I am not above, I'm not below bringing in like some good old Jungian therapy if it's going to help a person to
Yeah.
unpack a root understanding, because oftentimes it's so convoluted because it stacks upon stacks upon stacks upon stacks upon stacks. It's like having 200 newspapers, and the episode, the issue that you want, is somewhere buried like 300 issues back, but all the other issues still talk about the same thing. So when we're treating it, we can go, okay, well, that could be an autism thing, or it could be a trauma thing. So let's address trauma. Is far easier to treat with all the different techniques that we have. So we treat the trauma symptoms first, and then we see what's left.
And so my follow up and final question about all of those that I had prepared is, uh, according to recent statistics, 85% of people with autism are unemployed or struggling to find work. A lot of people with ADHD are often fired. They are in rough financial situations with
Hmm.
not a lot of studies usually in this kind of stuff. So how can people that are in vulnerable position or in positions where they don't have a lot of money can find a therapist or can find therapy? Because as you said, it's expensive, it's difficult, and of
Well,
course the population that is most at risk struggles the most to find that kind of help.
I would start with websites, honestly. The Psychology Today website is a pretty good resource. It also will say on the person's bio if they're accepting new clients and what insurances they take, as well as if they have a sliding scale private pay fee. There's also kind of a new project that is kind of exciting. It's called ndtherapists.com. That's capital N, capital D, therapists.com. And it started up as somebody that was gathering resources for people that are neurodivergent, that were looking for neurodivergent friendly therapists, or therapists themselves that are neurodivergent, in order to uh, create sort of a library of clinicians. So this is actually a fairly new project. It only got off the ground about a year ago. So far as I know, I think there's only like 20 or 30 therapists on there. But if there are therapists out there that are neurodivergent or really love working with the neurodivergent community, I would encourage them to go there and fill out the application form and get on that as a resource, because not only is that going to provide benefit to the community, but also to the therapist,
Yeah, absolutely.
because it's a source of free advertising for the clinician, as well as letting them work with the populations they want to work with.
I'm going to close the recording soon.
Yeah.
So if people want to find you, they can find you on TikTok
Uh-huh.
with the handle Alex Hogg.
Yep. Alex Hogue
Hoog.
or Alice Orlophis. Yep.
So people can find you on TikTok under Alex Hogg.
Yep.
So to everyone listening, thank you very much for listening. And we hope to see you on the next episodes. And I probably will have Alex back.
Yeah. I'd be happy to come back. This is fun.